Hello everybody and welcome to another Fury of Dracula video. In this one I'll be discussing my own views on the game in 2026 as a response to a video I've already made, and that is on the channel, which discusses all the stats from the 1003 tournament games that we've played in the community so far. I'll briefly summarise the stats here, but if you want to see all the numbers I recommend checking that other video out, and once we've done that, the main focus of the video will be on the house rule suggestions, and I'd like you all to get involved with that conversation. So, to summarise the stats... Oh yeah, there's the plug for the other video I've done. To summarise the stats, the first main takeaway is while the overall win rate between Hunters and Dracula is 50%, this hides a disparity between players of differing experience and skill. At lower percentiles, Dracula holds the win rate advantage, while Hunters have the advantage at higher percentiles. I'll show the graph on that again in a minute. We also show that the vast majority of Hunter victories take place in the third week, while Dracula normally needs to reach the fourth week to gain the remaining necessary influence points via the Fury of Dracula mechanic. As such, Dracula players, even if they are able to mature vampires, need to be good at surviving until the fourth week. Lastly, Consecrated Ground, seen as perhaps the most influential card in the game, is actually far more skill dependent than expected, but is still very strong when the top players are involved. Before we go into the discussion of the win rate curve again, I want to touch on the fact that multiple factors influence an individual player's or faction's win rate. Of course, we've seen that the respective skill floors and skill ceilings of the two factions can contribute to this. Dracula is initially easier to pick up and grasp, while Hunters have a myriad of resources and a well-defined meta that can be used to really swing the game and stifle Dracula's ability to gain any sort of clear advantage. Due to the meta, there's also an imbalance in that Dracula's event cards are almost non-existent, and he also cannot nullify Hunter's allies, while being unable to safely play allies of his own. These are all game-related elements, but there are also personal elements as well, such as the experience of the game, but also strategic games in general, the dedication and mentality of the player to improve, and stay mentally composed during a nerve-wracking game as well. Furthermore, individual playstyle and how a player weighs up specific key decisions and assesses risk. We cannot deny the fact that luck is also a factor. I can think of many a game for myself that has swung on a 50-50 decision or the event deck just cooperating at the perfect moment. Additional external factors, such as health and real-life commitments, also matter. We don't play the game in a bubble in which we are not influenced by anything else. I only mention this just to keep this in mind, as I don't want me or anyone else using terms like Hunter's OP or Dracula OP flippantly, even if we mean it as a joke, as some might take it literally. Being highly skilled on either or both factions is something that we should celebrate, and not just simply assign it to one faction being overpowered. For a game as complex as this, it is incredible that the overall win rate is as even as it is. That being said, this graph that I showed in the previous video demonstrates that there is a disparity between the two factions at low and high skill levels. Dracula has the advantage at lower skill levels, as it is easy to pick up, and Hunter players are having to adapt to controlling all four characters at once, all the various event timings and combinations, as well as the general meta and playing as efficiently as possible. At higher skill levels, Hunters have the advantage as they have a variety of resources that can catch Dracula out. Also, Hunters only need one good opportunity to try and catch Dracula, whereas Dracula has to accumulate lots of small advantages over the whole game. How many times have you heard this in commentary? Dracula has played fantastically this game, but it's close to the end of the third week, and he has no points, and the Hunters are fairly well equipped. For Dracula, it can really feel impossible at times to see any sort of opening or opportunity. So, the question is, should we do something about it? Maybe the title for this slide should have a question mark. Should we be looking for the game to be balanced in such a way so that the win rate curves for the two factions overlap for the top 25%? What about the remaining 75%? Closing the win rate curves for the top 25% will naturally bring the overall win rate into Dracula's favour a little bit. But what happens if the house rules or changes which are implemented also cause Dracula's win rate to increase quite a bit across all percentiles. What overall win rate in Dracula's favour would be acceptable even if the game felt completely balanced for the very top players? 55%? 60? 65? I don't know what the correct answer is, and maybe there isn't one. It's a very subjective question. Some of you might be looking at the current situation and think it's acceptable. Some of you might be questioning why we're ignoring the disparity in win rate for the bottom 50%. That is a larger proportion of the community, after all. However, Dracula having an advantage for matches involving less experienced or skilled players is fine, as he has advanced rules that can be turned off. There isn't the same option in terms of turning off advanced settings for the hunters. Maybe the designers of the game never felt that the hunter meta would become so refined and Dracula would need the additional help. Hopefully we can all agree, though, that when we watch a game involving the two best players currently in the community in a tournament final, say, we want the match to be even in the sense that faction imbalance will play less of a role, and the individual decisions and play styles take more of a focus. So maybe that's what we should be aiming towards. In friendly games, players can customize their experience. On the other hand, in tournaments, we have to try and find a balance that will work for everyone, but also keep everybody interested in the game as well. Does this mean that the game requires a fundamental overhaul or subtle tweaks? In our Discord community, a link to which you'll find in the video description, we have a channel dedicated to discussing the various changes we'd like to see to the game, and a lot of them fall into the bracket of things that a hypothetical 5th edition might address. It's definitely a lovely thought exercise, and it's interesting to see what aspects of the game each individual person targets for change. The thing is, since so many aspects of the game are intertwined, achieving balance could be extremely difficult. I think the game is in a decent spot, all things considered, for a game with such asymmetry and many interactions, and that we're also normally playing it in an unconventional way with mostly 1v1 games. And for now, just a few subtle changes here and there, rather than, a huge overhaul of the game, could be enough to push the game in the direction that we desire. And hopefully any suggested changes will not be so radical or controversial, and therefore would have more support within the community and the player base. Now, my word is not law, but I have a platform, and I'm going to take advantage of it to suggest the house rules that I personally would like to see. But they are in no way endorsed by the admin team as a whole, even though I have shared the ideas with them, and they got mostly positive feedback, but not completely. I'm also wanting to share them with you all to get feedback on them, plus to hear other suggestions. However, before we all go mad with power and imagination for change, any house rules, I believe, have to fit certain criteria. It is clear that the hunters have to be nerfed a little bit, but this is difficult to do as they have a wide array of tools at their disposal and a general meta which gives consistent results. And I don't want this to be radically overhauled, so it ends up feeling like a very different game, or everybody has to relearn the things that they've already learned to a great extent. Dracula, on the other hand, needs to be buffed a bit, but in a way that doesn't lower the skill floor, such as just giving him more health. And it's complicated as he doesn't have as many resources to choose from to target, and we don't want to be adding new ones. Implementation is the key factor, however. From the developer perspective, if Nomad were to implement additional house rules, they might have to be done under time constraints from their side of things, due to other projects and deadlines. And as such, they would have to be achievable without reinventing the wheel in terms of how the game flowed, necessarily pop-up screens, etc. And the last thing we need are bugs to return as well. At this point, let me make it clear right now that this video is putting my perspective on things and getting the ball rolling in terms of a community-wide discussion about how we see the game for the upcoming months and years. But Nomad are not held to a promise on anything. 2 years ago, during the Immortal update and the chat I had with Tom and Eriger, which you can find on the channel, they said they were keen to learn more about the game and see statistics to guide any future decisions. Hence why, the previous video was made, as well as also rewarding the players who'd taken the time to submit all the necessary information after each game over the last few years, and had been, I should say, patiently waiting for the data to be processed. This video is more a message to Nomad to say, hello, we're here, and we're ready to take the next steps with the game when you are ready. at least even have a conversation about it. And we can also build consensus within the community about what house rules should be implemented, so then we can take advantage of any window Nomad have in their schedule. But if that window doesn't appear anytime soon, then that's okay as well. Right, important tangent over. The house rules also must be easy to understand. I'm assuming that any card text will not be altered visually. So the house rules have to be such that we can remember them while playing, and new players to the community tournaments are not overwhelmed by them. They also have to be compatible with the official digital edition made by Nomad. I have had people in the past give me suggestions and then justifying them by saying that we could just run tournaments on things like Tabletop Simulator. While I'm not in a way against programs like that in general, I think in a case like this, it is not something that I would endorse for our community events for multiple reasons, which I will not bore you with just now. And then lastly, we have to consider balance. Hopefully the house rules will be such that they affect the top percentiles only. They are buffs or nerfs that scale with experience and are not wholesale changes to the game. But this is hard. And until we implement them, we don't know if that's going to be true or not. I don't know if the house rules I've come up with fit these criteria. I think they do, but hopefully you'll tell me down in the comments if they don't, and then you'll be able to suggest your alternatives. Right, let's get into the house rules then that I've put up for consideration. So it's an amalgamation of my thoughts on the game, and also, I listen to people from the community and see what they're saying as well. So, nerfing Hunter allies. Thanks to the award-winning and extremely concise video I have already made on this topic, we already know that there is a real disparity on the relevance of allies. Dracula never plays them, due to firstly never really obtaining them in the first place. And even when he does, the immediate effect on the card is far superior, and hunters have 2 copies of Good Luck that they could use to get rid of the ally immediately. On the other hand, hunter allies are almost guaranteed to be in play all game long, and they do really affect Dracula's well-being. Sister Agatha limits Dracula by not allowing him to heal during combat at all, and it creates a threshold below which Dracula cannot escape. Rufus Smith, on the other hand, reduces the amount of damage that the hunters have to directly do to Dracula, and it makes other cards like Crow's Leap more relevant. So a nerf to Sister Agatha is really simple. Just reduce the damage on her activation from 2 to 1. She's still present, but Dracula's options are slightly more open. A nerf to Rufus Smith is more complicated. The simplest option I can think of is that the base damage sustained from movement between adjacent C zones is reduced from 1 to 0, and then Rufus Smith causes Dracula to take 1 damage, not 2. So Rufus himself hasn't been nerfed, and maybe he's more valuable now, but the baseline damage has been moved down by 1. Dracula still has to take damage initially, entering the sea, and he isn't placing encounters while at sea, so I don't see this as broken too much. Highly skilled Dracula players will be able to benefit from the additional health that they would possess from these 2 changes, and although lower skilled Dracula players would still benefit, they still have to maintain good positioning and so on. They would be more focused on the macro of the game rather than, minute micro decisions. And allies don't appear every game anyway. Oh, a word on John Verharker. I haven't forgotten about him. He's fine as he is. We don't need to change him. Right, on to Consecrated Ground. So, we've seen from the analysis that it is a skill-dependent card. It doesn't guarantee victory for everybody, but in the right hands and with sufficient follow-up, it is utterly game-changing at high level. But like many cards, we actually saw in the analysis that high win rate hunters were more likely to win without Consecrated Ground, which still is kind of crazy to think about, but never mind. So the community has actually been testing out a variant recently, which is that when Consecrated Ground is activated, the hunter player decides if they want to place a CG token alone or up to 3 Heavenly Host tokens instead, not both. In the case of the latter, Dracula would then decide where this Consecrated Ground token is placed, as currently we have no way to not play the Consecrated Ground token. I'm intrigued by this variant, but I haven't personally tried it out myself, so I'll need feedback in the comments about it. I know the players involved with setting this up have set up a Google form to try to see if they can see any win rate shifts and things, but I don't know if all players are using it in their games at the moment. It might be that we'll have to combine this variant with a rule that says Dracula is unable to wolf form if a token is placed in his current location, as we currently rule that he can do that. We'll have to see. If this was to be done, it would potentially require a new interface screen and such for the hunter to choose between the two different options. As a quick aside from my script, even if this variant is liked by the community, I am very nervous from an admin perspective from putting it into a tournament setting if it was not baked into the digital edition code, because I can just see quite a few scenarios where the rule is forgotten at the vital moment, or if new players come into the community and they don't realise that the rule exists and such. And then we could have loads of problems with games being voided and things. So if it's not baked into the code, I don't want to consider it for tournament play. But for friendly games, if people want to try it out, go for it. Right. My simpler idea to nerf Consecrated Ground is just simply to reduce the number of Heavenly Host tokens that can be played from 3 to 2. I don't know anything about development and coding and stuff, but I feel it's just changing a number in a line of code. So hopefully that makes it easier. This obviously reduces the potential for CG nukes, but not CG hotel or a one-time checkpoint penalty. If you're not familiar with those terminologies, don't worry about it. I should remake a video about that when I have time. But I'm also inclined to think that Heavenly Host tokens should be discarded to place the token, but that might be a little bit radical for now. I'm happy just to go halfway and see how it goes first. But also, if the current community variant has a clear advantage over my suggestion that I haven't seen, then I'll happily try it out. Okay. In a recent conversation with Artwin, our most recent tournament champion, a house rule he suggested would be to allow Dracula to essentially mulligan his starting hand of encounters once, if they so desire. It was uncertain with this idea if the encounter deck should then be reshuffled before or after the new draw of encounter cards, but that's up for discussion. The justification for the change is that it would give Dracula a greater probability of having a stronger encounter hand and make the early trail more threatening. But I know my luck. If I play with this rule, I'd draw a worse hand second time round. But if it makes hoaxes a more common threat, in particular, which means Dracula will get more event cards, then I see why such a change is justifiable. I, however, have a slightly more radical solution, and this might be a bit overboard, but I think Dracula should be able to place an encounter card on his initial starting location. It would make the early trail even more threatening than Artwin's suggestion, so we're more likely to see early encounter mature effects, which is always fun. Even as spectators, right, we want to see stuff maturing. Secondly, it would enhance Dracula's layer strategy as well for the Dracula players who just want to layer up and then return to those layers. It would enhance that by having an additional encounter there on the first layer. So it is not necessarily incentivizing one type of Dracula playstyle. It also lowers the power of newspaper reports in that you're reducing the probability of it being drawn to reveal that first location with an encounter by just under 10% and bringing it towards 50-50 odds. This might mix up the hunter meta in terms of starting positions, or cause more divergence towards hunters who continue to sit still in supply and those who choose not to as much. It also means that before the trail is revealed, the hunters as a whole have fewer turns supplying. So that means fewer events, less optimized items and train tickets, and Dracula can hopefully punish that, or at least be able to survive a little bit longer, because the hunters will less often have those really key combination of cards. But the thing is, it'll be the best Draculas who can really see the opportunity to punish slightly weaker hunters. And even if week 1 goes amazingly well for Dracula, regardless of skill level, they still had to survive until weeks 3 or 4. Most likely the latter, based upon the stats we looked at last time. I personally would much rather see Dracula mature Hoax after waiting for it to mature for more or less a week, and then they have to make the right decision about what event card to keep out of all the choices they have, rather than just them coin flipping a good event with a Dark Core house rule discussed in the previous video. But that might be just me. Regarding influence, it has always been a discussion in the community about the lack of consistency between when Dracula does or doesn't get points from biting hunters. To fix this, but also to provide another source of influence, albeit a small one, Dracula or a vampire resolving fangs against a heavenly host, thus resulting in a bite, should result in a gain of 1 of influence. It might also shake up the item meta a bit, with certain hunters valuing stakes and anti-fang items even more, as they might not want to risk throwing out heavenly hosts against vampires when they know they could accelerate Dracula towards victory even more. Now, in the current situation, I sometimes throw out heavenly hosts against a reckless vampire, especially if it's not an ambush, because then at least I know, I mean, even if it is an ambush, but I would say, well, worst case scenario, I get bitten. I lose the heavenly host. But now if I'm wondering about, I'm going to give up points as well, and that 1 point could be crucial later. And if it's an ambush, we'll say a reckless vampire, then it could be 2 influence if you get it wrong. It'd put more jeopardy into the combat. I do also have the idea of increasing the Fury of Dracula influence from 3 to 4. The reason for this is that it would create more jeopardy for the end of the game, as fewer moves would be needed for Dracula to win, starting from 0 influence. And as we saw last time, Dracula does at times struggle to get points from vampire matures and more so hunter deaths. Versus stronger hunters who are relentless, I don't mind Dracula needing 1 day fewer in the 4th week to win. But we'll see what you think on this one. Regarding Great Strength, it is slightly strange in terms of theme that anyone can just play it to save a fellow hunter, even if the person who has it isn't even in the combat. Also, as we saw previously, hunters do not die very often. And often a high-level game is centered around the fact that Dracula's only chance of getting out of a fight is actually killing a hunter first. But then this sole avenue is foiled by Great Strength. And it removes the jeopardy from the hunter's perspective if they know they've got Great Strength in their back pocket. A suggestion from the community was that the card could only be used to save the hunter who possesses it, which I don't mind, but that might be a little bit too much of a nerf, so we might need to, in a hypothetical 5th edition, you might need multiple copies of Great Strength to sort of balance that out. I think maybe Great Strength should be able to be used against encounters as well, but we'll hold that. That's too radical. So perhaps a nice halfway house option is that the hunter with Great Strength can save a different hunter, but they must both be in the combat. And then that would also mean if a hunter with Great Strength in hand was bitten or chose to escape from a combat, Great Strength would then be removed with them, and it would leave the other hunters vulnerable. They wouldn't be able to use it after leaving the combat, if that makes sense. Suddenly I've had an idea just pop into my head now. Unless Great Strength was made into a play before combat card. We'll tuck that away and see what you think. In addition, moving on to another topic. In addition, to fix something that has bugged a lot of us for quite a while is the uselessness of Long Night, in that playing it at dawn when you don't know how the day phase will pan out is rather daft. So let's make it that it can be played at dusk instead. Make Long Night great for once. So, here's a summary of the house rules I have in mind. I feel implementing all of them at once wouldn't overhaul the game too much, as a lot of these elements do not appear in every game anyway. The only thing I'm on the fence about is the change to Dracula having an encounter on his starting location and Dracula gaining 4 influence in the 4th week. Both together might be a bit too much. as I would assume we would see more vampires maturing if the former was in play. So perhaps one or the other would suffice, but we'll see what you think. Hopefully all of these changes would be adequate to achieve the change in win rate desired at the top level, without affecting the other players' experience too much. But what about everybody else, especially the lower 40%, and the newer players who are coming to the community? As I said before, in friendly games the experience can be customized, but would these changes be off-putting to some? One idea that was floated to me a while ago was that of bidding. The players are able to negotiate the game conditions that they want, and then that would impact the way the result is scored. I'm saying that with a question mark, as I don't really know how it would work, and how we would create a fair and balanced scoring system for tournaments. If anyone can enlighten me on that, please let me know. And for those of you who maybe are considering to be new tournament participants one day, how would you feel if you entered the community and then suddenly saw all of these house rules that you might not expect? The last thing I want to mention is, and again, this is my opinion and not necessarily consensus of the whole admin team, but hopefully it is a sensible suggestion. Any house rules which are chosen should be given enough time for their effects to be properly felt in terms of the number of games played and literal time, in case there's a shift in the meta as everyone adjusts, or we get a huge flux of new players joining that might have a bigger effect on win rates and other stats. We can't really look at the stats from one tournament and say that with certainty that the game is closer to or further away from where we want it to be. We have to look at the trend in win rates per tournament. Oh no, look at the trend in win rates per tournament that I showed you in the previous video as an example of that. So, yeah, I think it's very much a case of implementing these house rules and letting, as a community, we have to have confidence in the house rules that we've chosen and just let them run for a bit, and then we can calculate the stats again and do a side-by-side comparison and see if things have changed or not. Anyway, what do you think about all this? Let us know in the comments below, or even better, join the Nomad and dedicated Fury of Dracula Discord communities. The links are in the description. We're actually in the midst of planning the next tournament that will use a format we've never done before. So I'm really excited about it, but we will delay the announcement of it until we hear from Nomad one way or the other about what could possibly be done regarding house rules and the like. So if you're interested in participating, please join the Discords, and if you don't want to participate just yet, join anyway, as you can find friendly games, chat to the devs, post memes, and join in and watch our live streams of the games when they do happen. At the end of the day, from an admin perspective, we run these events voluntarily just out of pure passion for the game, and we just want to see the community we want to see the community keep growing with friendly people who just love Fury of Dracula as much as we do. As I said in the previous video, I don't normally pander for likes, but these two videos I've made have taken me quite a while, with me having to write scripts during my lunch breaks at work and doing analysis late at night once my baby daughter finally decided to fall asleep. And that is also the reason for me perhaps sounding rather sleepy just now, as this is a late night recording. But I wanted to get this video out for you. So if you did enjoy it, please hit like or leave a comment down below. I'll read everything. And that's all for now, folks. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another Fury of Dracula video very soon, and hopefully I'll see you around in the Discords. Take care, everybody. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.